talk about costume design, all right, let's say the block of classical cinema from Hollywood or from England, from Italy, whatever. That's costume design. You're talking about Piero Tossi, you're talking about the House of Torelli in Rome, Visconti's films, and, you know, extraordinary things. But they're of a time and place. In other words, they are depicting period. And there's an aspect of accuracy, to say the least, and some, what's the word, a flourish to that accuracy, a touch of the artist, so to speak, beyond that. You know, in the case of Minnelli directing Madame Bovary, they changed the period costuming, I believe, to be around the 1870s or so in Paris, because they felt it was more interesting than the actual period the book was written about. I believe could be the 1840s. And so these things are, you know, once you make that kind of decision, you do have drawings from the 1840s. You do have drawings from the 1870s. You do have pictures from the 1920s. One of the key things I found, like in Age of Innocence, for example, costumes, where it was an upper strata of society, was I always wanted the costumes to feel lived in, that they shouldn't look like costumes. That was the idea. Particularly the people in the street, the extras, or what they call now the atmosphere. In the case of Gangs in New York, it's different. In the Gangs in New York, we had license to go as far as we wanted with costumes.
We got the Daybreak Boys and the Swamp Angels. They worked the river looting ships. The Frog Hollow Shanghai sailors down around the Bloody Angle. Shirt Tails was rough for a while, but they become a bunch of Jack Roman dandies, lolling around Murderer's Alley looking like Chinamen.
The gangs did dress differently. Gangs dress differently today, each one. So they know each other. They could see that person's wearing that. They can see it a block away. You know, all right, be careful. There's this group coming, and those persons, this person wears suspenders a certain way. They call them galluses. The Bowery Boys behaved a certain way. They all had their own uniforms.
There's the Plug Uglies. They're from somewhere deep in the old country. Got their own language. No one understands what they're saying. They love to fight the cops. And the night walkers, the rag pickers, row. They work on their backs and kill with their hands. They're so scurvy under the Plug Uglies to talk to them. But who knows what they're saying?
We could take license with that. In the case of the very few characters in the film with the upper classes were more conventional. But everything else, you could let your mind go. Of course, films like Mean Streets or Taxi Driver or going up to After Hours, things like that, it's a different kind of costume design. In other words, it shouldn't be confused, I think, with the costume designers and of the classical cinema. It's something else. One has to understand the world around them and the world that they're depicting. And so, in a way, a costume designer has to understand for character what that character could be wearing, where that character would shop for clothes, where that character would inherit clothes, certain colors that would look right on the character, certain colors that were right on the character but change because the actor is somewhat different, so you have to rearrange it somehow or rework it, rethink it. And so you need somebody who understands contemporary expression in costuming, expression in dressing. Whether you go from Armani to, I don't know what, to me today, people wear those down jackets, black, and they, from far away, it looks like those garbage bags. So the style is gone in a way. So it's more practical, but it's a different statement. It's a very different statement about who you are and what the world is. And one has to know that. One really has to know that. And so costume designers of a modern film really comes from, and it always does, whether it's period or modern, but even more so with the modern now, comes from the character, always from the character. What that character would, she or he would wear, and particularly when they would wear it, what's appropriate for that world. And if you want to take it and move, I'm not talking about fantasy films, I'm not talking about period pieces, I'm talking about present day cinema. If I go back to Mean Streets, for example, I'll get the costumes. Well, I got the costumes with Harvey and with David Proval and Richard Romanos and everybody and Amy Robinson. We all worked together, and I got costumes. I specifically knew what I wanted. Bob knew kind of what he wanted, but he found that little shirt. I think it was a knit shirt with a little chain that you pull down, a little a zipper chain, which was popular for like 20 minutes, I think, in 1969 or something. And he thought this was good character thing. I said, yeah. And then one day I was talking to him down in his loft. He had a loft at the time. And he came out of the back room and he had this little hat on. And he said, I think this hat. And I said, that's absolutely right. That's the hat. Because he understood, having spent a lot of time in the Lower East Side when I was growing up, around 16 years old, we kind of knew each other. He knew the people, and he knew the culture, you know? And so the hat made me understand that he really understood everything. Now, I think over the years he said he didn't do that, but I know he did it. I know he put the hat on, okay? So, because then I said, you know, whatever he's going to suggest, I think he's on to something accurate, and we know it. And he knew the people that somehow the picture was written about and that sort of thing. And when you go all the way down to Taxi Driver, the jacket of the King Kong company, whatever, the uses of browns, brown plaids in a way, beiges, all the way through to Raging Bull. The Raging Bull is interesting, because ultimately, and it was his passion to do Jake LaMotta, but ultimately, I watched him sort of over a period of a couple of years between his working out that he would do, especially when he was doing New York, he was always working out for the possibility of doing this film, which included boxing, you know, Raging Bull. And so he would work it in such a way with photographs of Jake and the people around him, the curling of the hair, the way the hair would lay at different times in Jake's life. Testing, I'd say 20 to 30 different noses. And it's not exaggeration, because the noses change because of the fights, you know. But what looked like the right nose for that sort of makeup, prosthetics, and that sort of thing, that wouldn't look like a prosthetic. And so ultimately, that all came together when we started to play around, Dick Bruno and all of us playing around with the costumes. Racks were brought in of existing costumes, and they call today vintage. Basically, it's used clothes, you know, and period pieces, you know. And I remember we're here on 58th Street somewhere, and I forget, I was in a production office of some kind. There was a rack of clothes, and he'd be putting on jackets and putting on jackets. It was an exhausting experience because we were trying so many different things. We knew that ultimately he didn't wear as many suits as the other people did in the film and that sort of thing. But what did he lounge around in, you know? And he suddenly picked up this jacket and put it on. It was a jacket, a 3/4 length, black, and it had a white top to it. And we looked at it, and it was strong enough and off enough and made a statement, a character statement. And he said, we looked at each other, and he said, look at this. I said, yeah, that's it. That was it. And that's the basis of that character, that jacket, which he uses in a few scenes in the beginning, especially when he talks to Kathy Moriarty, tells her to come out and join him in the car, whatever. But there was something about the boldness of it, and maybe the shoulders. Maybe the shoulders. I don't know, but it felt right. King of Comedy was really interesting, because King of Comedy, we tried something different, a Paul Zimmerman script, something I didn't want to do again, but he convinced me over the years, because I wasn't aware of the element of celebrity at the point at which Bob was. He became aware of it right around the time he did Taxi Driver, because he had done Godfather 2. And he became aware of a certain kind of his relationship to the people around him started to change, or people would come up to him in the street in a different way. And this whole strangeness about the cult of celebrity. And so by the time we did Raging Bull, I began to sense what they were talking about. And I was still on the cusp of it, in a sense. I still felt, in a way, like one of the cultish fans, so to speak, of a Jerry or The Tonight Show, New York television, filmmakers and that sort of thing. But at the same time, you're trying to work as a filmmaker so that you're on both sides of it. And so with Rupert Pupkin, which is a name I think Paul Zimmerman got from a taxi driver, I think. He took it off somebody who was in a car and taxi and saw the name. He thought it was really good. With Rupert, we just didn't know what he'd wear. We honestly didn't know. Dick Bruno is our great guy. He was our costume designer. And Dick and I and Bob, we were up on 59. We knew that we should go to certain places on 47th Street, on 48th Street, 58th Street, maybe. No, not 58, but 53rd, Broadway, 7th Avenue. That was still very much, the Brill Building was still very much Broadway, and all the filmmaking centers were really up at that, in that place. Now they're all downtown in Tribeca or Soho. But in the 60s and 70s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was really between 47th Street, the Screen Building, the Brill Building, and the sense of Broadway Danny Rose, the sense of, clothing stores that sold to lounge singers. This is, they had comics from the Borscht Belt would buy the clothes there. So it's like really showbiz, but on a real hard-working, day-to-day foot soldier world, in a way. And they'd have all the 8x10 stills in there, glossies signed to the different store owners. Thanks for everything, that sort of thing, from Milton Berle or, movie stars. But primarily New York comics, New York performers. And so we were walking around, I think around Central Park South or whatever. We had just gone from one store to another, and we weren't quite sure. We said, what does he wear, ultimately? We were just narrowing in on it. We had some thoughts. It was a little easier with Jerry Lewis and a couple of the others, but with Rupert, what is he, As we were walking by, there was a store, I think it may have been on 7th Avenue or Broadway, I'm not quite sure. And it was called Lou Magram, Shirt Maker to the Stars. And a small storefront, and we always used to see it, we'd always walk by and strip making. The shirts were, interesting looking. They had a kind of showbiz feel to them, a kind of flourish, so to speak. Big, wide, bow ties, all kinds of things, ruffled shirts. And we looked in the window and we were stunned. We saw this mannequin, and the mannequin was wearing a seersucker blue and white striped suit, three-piece, I believe, navy blue or dark blue shirt with a white collar, a yellow knit tie, and kind of a white leather slip-ons. And not only was the costume right, but the face was right. The hair on the mannequin was right. The mustache was right. In fact, the mustache was a fraction of an inch shorter on one side than the other. And we looked at him, we looked at each other and said, that's him. That's him. Even the hair is him. So that's what we did.
I'll tell you, boy. Hi, Eliza. Good seeing you. Gerald, good seeing you. Jerry, don't get up. Ah, boy, I'll tell you. Every time you come back from a tour, I don't know what it is, but there must be something in the air or the tour. It really becomes you. It's like you become rejuvenated. I don't know what it is. Isn't that so, everybody?
You have to see, it came out of that part of the world at that time in New York, was show business. But it wasn't necessarily the successful show business. It was just show business because you had no other choice. You wouldn't get out of it. You were always looking for, the big break, and it didn't come. Maybe, And for us, it was, it came out of the very, how should I put it? It came out of the actual environment that the film takes place in, that the story takes place in. So it wasn't something imposed on the environment.